to the cloud. Okay, great. So we're going to go through some slides where we kind of have this deck labeled trauma-informed gone wild. So we're going to talk a little bit about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed in education and sort of what it doesn't mean. So first, we want to talk about how we feel in a trauma-informed education environment, responsibility is a huge part of that. And this does not, taking a trauma-informed approach does not give someone a free pass to act in a hurtful manner, in a disruptive manner, in an abusive manner. Everyone is still responsible for their actions, right? We talk about natural consequences, how consequences are actually critical, right? One of the most important things in being a trauma-informed educator is creating that feeling of felt safety and being a safe adult for kids. An adult that doesn't hold people accountable for their actions is not a safe adult for a kid, right? If you're a kid and you see something untoward going on or something that doesn't feel right to them going on, oh, you have multiple slides at the bottom and one on the left and the next on the right. How is that even possible? Okay, let me stop sharing. Thank you for telling me, Cindy.
I figured you might want to know instead of seeing just the one.
Yeah, I know I think I know what happened. Yeah. You know what I do is I get messages and I don't read them. I just always hit okay. And I think I had a pop-up asking me what I wanted to share and what I was doing, and I ignored it. Because why not? Let's see. Okay, so if
we have the same thing.
Okay. Oh, what's wrong?
I do everything in Google because a new PowerPoint throws me off.
No, I swear. This is like my second presentation in a week that has just been wild. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through them and kind of talk about some of the things that we hear in our trainings about trauma-informed care and education, and sort of some of the myths or misconceptions that we have about that, right? So going back to being a safe adult, when you're a kid or even when you're an adult, right, and someone's engaging in bad behavior and the safe adult or the responsible adult or the leader in the room doesn't address that behavior or hold people accountable, that doesn't feel safe for anyone, right? So we really want to let go of that concept that when we talk about stress-based behavior and trauma-based behavior, that we're making excuses or that, oh, you know, this kid's had a tough time, so let's just not worry about this behavior. It's actually the opposite. We really believe in consequences, but what we believe in is connection before correction, right? Getting to those consequences, but addressing the connection and the regulation with a kiddo first in order to help them get into a state of mind where they can even hear and understand what the consequences will be, and really leaning into natural consequences that are aimed at the behavior and not at the person, right? Trying to separate those two things. Having the perspective of, you know, this is a really good kid who's having a hard time right now, and we want to address that hard time and the behavior that's coming out of that. When it comes to expectations in trauma-informed care and education, we have high expectations for everyone when we're coming from this perspective and in this paradigm, right? If someone has a history of adversity or a really difficult time, even if they're just going through a hard time right then, we don't change the expectations for anyone. What we do is we want to offer a variety of ways and support to help people meet the expectations that we have, right? So we want to address those gaps. We don't want to change the expectation that we have or the standards that we have for kiddos just because they're having a hard time or because they're having a hard time, right? We just add in the support. When we come from a perspective of trauma-informed care and trauma-informed education, we believe everyone is doing their best at any given time. So we're really going to lean into that positive intent and believe that everyone is coming to the table with different unique experiences and walks of life to get us to where we are. And their response in a given moment is based on that, and that we're doing the best we can, us and them, right? We want to create an environment where people can learn from their mistakes in a productive and a non-punitive manner. So mistakes are kind of separate from bad behavior, right? It's okay to make mistakes. We're not going to get punished for making mistakes. And because that is different than bad behavior. For a lot of kids, in difficult environments, sometimes mistakes get equated to bad behavior, right? And so we really want to tease those apart from each other. Let's see. Just because when it comes to experience, we could find ourselves in situations where we're working with kids that are going through something that maybe we've been through before or that we have experience with, right? Where maybe our experience match, but that doesn't always mean that we know how someone's going to feel, right? And so we can approach it with empathy and maybe a little bit of understanding, but we don't want to make that leap and that assumption that, oh, I've been through this before and I know how this feels. And again, because we're all coming from different walks of life, different journeys, different experiences, we're really going to, and because trauma and adversity show up so differently for people, and it is something that comes from how we interpret and process and perceive a situation, the feelings that are coming out of it for individuals are going to be very different. And then when it comes to listening, we really want to focus on listening to understand and taking those pauses in that time to hear, listen, and then prepare our response. Instead of having sort of set things that, when we're in this situation, we do this. We want to really be able to take the time and pause, listen to understand, so that we can provide in different supports, different connections, and different consequences for different individuals because everyone is so different. And then I think, I don't want to say the most critical thing because that's really hard to get something distilled down to the most critical thing. But when we approach education and the way that we manage our classrooms and our lives, really, and our relationships, we value relationship over efficiency. A lot of times, time is our biggest opponent, I think, but it's also in some ways on our side, because when you're in a classroom or you're in a school environment, you do have the entire school year, right? And so you have, first of all, the great ability to see change and growth in individuals, which is so amazing. But we know that time is also precious. And sometimes it can feel like, we hear a lot, like, I don't have time for all of this. I don't have the bandwidth to do all of this. And that is something that I definitely understand. But we want to focus on the relationship over efficiency. And when we can really come from connection before correction and proactive behavior to try and interrupt patterns and cycles of behavior, we're investing extra time, right? But we're also building that relationship, and we are hopefully decreasing incidents over the course of the time that we have with a particular student or a particular individual, depending on what our role is, right? So wanted to go through some of those and just talk about what trauma-informed care and education is and isn't, and then open it up to both of you to see if you have been able to, if you were able to prepare or bring anything. So first of all, let's just see if anyone has any questions. Do you have any thoughts or questions about some of those concepts or things that we brought up? Okay. And if you can always put them in the chat too. So if you're typing, keep typing. And then if you have brought a case study, feel free to message that to me and I will just read it out. That way we kind of maintain that privacy, both for you and for whoever is involved in the story or in the incident, and giving you the opportunity to troubleshoot trauma-based behavior, right? And have a conversation with each other about how can we think about and come and approach behavior in our classrooms differently. And if we don't have any, or not even only in our classrooms, right? Depending on your role in a whole entire school environment, in your institution. If you don't have any, I do have a couple that I've collected from, I will sound very old when I say this, but the World Wide Web.
I'm putting one in the chat.
Oh, thank you. I'm also going to add something to the chat that you guys can take away with you. These are some questions that we're going to talk about when we talk about this. So when we talk about a scenario or think about a scenario, we're going to ask ourselves 3 questions. So what might the underlying need or trigger be behind this behavior? So what is the behavior really telling us? And how could a trauma informed approach look different than quote unquote traditional? Thank you, Cindy. I will get to that in just a second. Then traditional disciplinary. And we can also ask ourselves what proactive classroom strategies could prevent escalation. So these are some questions that you can bring to different instances and situations that come up in your environment. So we're going to talk about an elementary age student who's extremely aggressive with peers and adults. Mom is criminal justice impacted, so she is currently incarcerated. Siblings are a lot older and have had aggressive behavior in the past. And this is his first experience in a school. So he's a young kiddo, wasn't in preschool, and is really in his first structured environment, but extremely aggressive with peers and adults. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk first when we're talking about aggressive behavior, both towards peers, right? Other students and adults. So it's not just, in a friend group, it's not just towards one teacher. It sounds like it's pretty universal. What might this kind of behavior be telling us? Let's talk about maybe some of the underlying needs, right? I believe behavior is a language, right? We talk about this a lot in our trainings. Behavior is a language, and we are born, and I'm sure you've heard me say this before, if you've ever been in a training with me, we're born with all of our feelings and none of our skills, right? And so when we have this kind of behavior, this really aggressive behavior, it's a gap in skills versus feelings, right? So what are some potential underlying needs that might be, the first thing that comes to mind for me, honestly, is protective, like a very protective, like shield almost, right? Like a defense mechanism, maybe like a not feeling super safe, which would make a lot of sense if we have, a parent that is not in the home because they're criminally justice impacted, and having other adults and older kids in the house, right, who are aggressive and show aggressive behavior, and not even knowing what a structured environment looks like or feels like, right? We know from when we talk about the hand model of the brain, right? When you're in your stress response system and you're not in your cognitive brain, sounds like this kiddo is probably building a lot of neural pathways like this in a chaotic environment, which means chaos feels good and normal and safe. Like that's a safety template, right? So that sounds like a good place to start for me. I'm curious to have thoughts from either of you and sort of what interventions have we tried? Is anything working? Is there any felt safety for this kiddo? It sounds like just creating a safe environment is critical. the kiddo is getting some one-on-one support to build social skills or to build skills in a small counseling group, right? Which maybe looks a little bit like a nurture group where we're giving and receiving like care and words and language, and hopefully is starting to build that relationship and that felt safety. I imagine for this child that the classroom probably feels really overwhelming after being in a small group, right? And having that, and then just sort of retreating, going back into a bigger space with so many people and not getting probably the reinforcement at home either of those skills that are being learned, right? um Lots of positive reinforcement going on for this kid, so when they're on task and demonstrating appropriate behavior, really leaning into that, right? Which is great because then you're building up those strengths and really focusing on the strength based learning. But felt safety has got to be probably, I would imagine, the biggest thing for this child, and so challenging, right? So challenging, to even so much empathy. Like I just feel so, I'm like overwhelmed by feeling like so much empathy for this kid, right? Trying to put myself in like a little 6-year-old shoes and have to tackle those things every single day without the parental support. And that's really what makes the big difference when we're talking about having something be challenging but be able to overcome it versus challenging and having it really continue to have that adversity impact, is whether or not we have adults to help us process what's going on, right? So not having that support at home is a big risk factor for this child. What kind of proactive classroom strategies might we be able to talk about to prevent the escalation? Excuse me. Are we, for the teacher, it's challenging, right? We're talking about relationship over efficiency, but it's a room of kindergartners. So we're wrangling kids and trying to get them all in the right place and doing the positive support. But I'm thinking about a video that we show often that kind of talks about stress response in terms of relating it to the Hulk, right? And how, like, I don't know if you've ever seen that video. I'll find the link in just a second and I can put it in the chat. But where when the Hulk starts to like get really angry and like first his eyes turn green and then his skin turns green and then he's like out of his shirt and he's like really hulked out, right? And once he gets to that Hulk state, no amount of like consequences or anything calms him down. It's not possible. And really, the only opportunity that we have in the comic world of the Hulk is when someone can kind of notice that his eyes are starting to turn green. That's kind of the only point we have to intercede with the Hulk before he just hulks out, right? So when we're at classroom proactive strategies and we're talking about how can we kind of prevent things from escalating for this kid, it's really thinking about, okay, how do we catch him before when his eyes are just starting to turn green in this Hulk scenario, right? Before like the skin is green and the muscles are growing and we're hulking out, and then we're past the point of being able to stop what's happening, right? And you just kind of, and then it's just about containing. So have we been able to, I'm grabbing this link right here. Um, think about proactive classroom strategies for this kiddo's teacher too, is maybe circling back after these small counseling sessions and really being able to talk to his teacher about when he's starting to exhibit these things or act in this way, that's when it's starting to escalate. It's helping her or him, them, helping the teacher pinpoint the time, right? Um, we've also at the same school had several students whose parents have passed away. And one student in particular had already had one of their parents pass away, and now the other parent has passed away. So there's a lot of grief at the school right now as well. And I could tell you the one thing that we always talk about when we have grief is that Our grief doesn't ever really change, but the space and the ability that we have surrounding it to cope with it is what changes, right? So like grief always stays, and like our skills adapt around it. And so, but when we're talking about kids coming to school, that's a really tough one, right? It's really, I can only imagine, really challenging to focus in school um, when you're in a lot of grief, and it brings, it brings it to other students as well, kind of like the reality of that this can happen. And so it's something that I think causes other people to start to think about and have anxiety. What if this happened to me? So it's never just the student, right, that it's happening to. And I think this comes back again to felt safety. Do we have an environment, a classroom, a group, a safe adult, a trusted adult, a friend, anyone that is creating the space for the impacted students to feel safe and talk about how they're doing, really talk about how they're doing and how they're coping with things and what their needs are. So how do we think about felt safety for grief impact? Providing a lot of check-in, a lot of follow-up, a lot of support around remembering, did we write down the things that we need to do today? How are we getting our homework done? Right? What is your capacity and bandwidth to be able to remember the things that we're assigning and doing and talking about? Memory can be really hard when we're in a grief or a trauma situation. So I think building up those supports, right? We're not lowering the expectations, right? But we're building in the support that someone might need in that instance to be able to meet the expectation. Right. So I think a lot of check-ins and a lot of side to side conversations, shoulder to shoulder. How are you doing? What can we, how can we help you get through this? That's really, really tough. It's a really tough year. I'm sorry to hear that. Do we have anything else that we want to add to this? I can throw another in. Oh, I just changed my screen and I got some side lighting there. Let's go ahead and talk about one other that I just have from the internet. So let's talk about and use our trauma-informed lens for attention seeking and class clown behavior. So let's say we have a student that is constantly joking and interrupting lessons and kind of always just really trying to draw attention to themselves. So let's think about what might be driving that kind of behavior. What might be the need or let's just say the need. So instead of attention seeking, we're talking about attention needing here. That's how I like to think about that. So joking, blurting, interrupting lessons, pranks, excuse me, always in motion or trying it to draw attention to themselves. So what we want to think about here is what might the underlying need be behind this behavior. Adult and peer relationships. and skill building, emotional regulation, struggling academically with content. Yeah, I could definitely see that, like some boredom, not boredom, well, maybe boredom, but also, yeah, boredom or just struggling. Like I'm not connecting with this content. And so I'm going to goof off, right? I'm going to distract attention away from that and over to this, right? And emotional regulation for sure. I could definitely see that needing to have some skill building there as well. Um, yeah, I think boredom or struggling academically, right? I think it's also needing some connection, maybe it's a bid for connection, either from students or from the adult in the room, of trying to get sort of, which is a part of emotional regulation, right? Like needing some kind of co-regulation or some kind of something from another individual to kind of ease myself or ease how I feel about the situation, right? So if we're thinking about it in those terms, from some of those possibilities, what would a trauma-informed approach look like versus traditional discipline, right? I think traditional discipline probably just looks like, sit down, be quiet, no more talking, get to work, right? Very, I'm Gen X, so that's how I grew up, right? Which, even I do that to my kids sometimes. So, um, but what could we look at how could we look at this through a trauma informed lens and think about, okay, instead of why are you like this, we could think about, like, what is this telling you, what do you need right now, or you know how can I have this connection with you to get you to calm down or get you to focus for a while, right? And sometimes, I know some of the strategies that we talk about when we're in our trainings is, um, hey, that's a great joke. This is a great prank. You know when would be a really good time for that? When you get done with this lesson, you can tell the whole class a joke, right? Kind of doing a trade-off, a little bit of a trade-off. Students who have a lot of attention needing typically are also sort of like an anxious attachment kind of student, right? And a lot of times those students relate more to the teacher than they relate to the task. And so they need a lot of attention and they need a lot of input. And it really helps to tell them when they're going to get that attention and when they're going to get that input. And so that is one way to do that. Provide a buddy. I love that one. Buddy them up with someone, give them someone to give them that one-on-one attention and that one-on-one validation, right? Small group learning and some mentorship. And yes, I love this one. Find out what they are good at and give them a role in a leadership way at the thing that they are good at. I love that strength-based approach, right? You're so good at this, let's make you in charge of this. And that's giving them the validation and the attention that they're really looking for, right? And filling that bucket instead of saying, you don't need that bucket, stop right now, right? Hopefully it gets full enough. Hopefully their buddy laughs at their jokes and we can find something to slip them into a leadership role for. So awesome. This is awesome. I appreciate that feedback. So I'm okay with ending a little bit early. If you guys are okay with ending a little bit early, who doesn't love to get some extra time, right? Especially on a weeknight. We have birthday dinner for my daughter happening a little bit here at my house. My daughter's 27, if you can believe it. I don't even know how that happened. But I think this would be a good point. I'm going to stop the recording because definitely